Welcome to the Woke Conservative Podcast, where we are woke to the social injustices and rampant racism of the left. I'm your host, Woke Conservative, and this is the Constitution series, Part 6, a series where we take an in-depth examination of the Constitution from start to finish. If you have not listened to the previous parts of the series, I recommend you do that first, and I'll put a link down below for them. Today we will examine Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, and during it we will also examine the history of the fight against slavery in our country from 1800 to 1865. Before we get started, please give a like and share the podcast. Article 1, Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. So, here in the beginning, they're talking about slavery. They're saying that it's allowed and nothing can be done about it till 1808, and that a tax can actually be put on the buying and selling of slaves. Now, first off, I would like to say that the fact that the forefathers allowed slavery is something that has weighed heavy on my heart. And I know we have learned this was mainly due to the southern states, but it is also not an excuse for the whole of the country and for allowing it as part of this brave new government they were creating. The last point of interest is that they did state that it could be banned after 1808. So at that point, I became interested in what exactly happened in 1808 and after. I know that slavery was abolished in 1865, but let's look at what happened between 1800 and 1865. The rest I'm about to read in this section is from Wikipedia. 1800, a law was passed that built on the Slave Trade Act of 1794 that further pulled the United States out of international slave trade markets. In 1802, Ohio enters the scene and abolishes slavery in their state constitution. 1806, Thomas Jefferson calls the banning of the United States from the international trade and to make it a crime. And to quote Jefferson on this matter, withdraw the citizens of the United States from all further participation in those violations of human rights, which the morality, the reputation, and the best of our country have long been eager to prescribe. 1807. Judge Augustus Woodward denies the returning of 2 slaves to a man from Canada. Judge Woodward states, coming into this territory is by law of the land a free man. That was Michigan. 1808. The importation and exportation of slavery is made a crime. 1820. The Compromise of 1820, which states that above the 36-degree 30 line, slavery would not be allowed with the exception of Missouri. So if you're a bit confused about why this law came to pass when in 1808 they banned the import and export of slaves, the slaves were allowed to breed, and so they would have children, and those children would be born into slavery. 1841, United States versus the Amistad, concluded that the slaves of La Amistad, a trade ship, were illegally enslaved and as free men had the right to fight their captors. Unfortunately, in 1850, we take a step back with the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which allows for the returning of escaped slaves no matter what state they are in. 1857, another step back with the Dred Scott versus Sanford, which rules that slaves or their descendants cannot gain citizenship and even if they live in a free state, they are not entitled to freedom. 1859, the Wyandotte Constitution establishes the future state of Kansas as a free state. After 4 years of armed conflict between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the territory, Southern dominance in the U.S. Senate delays the admission of Kansas as a state until 1861. 1861, the election of Abraham Lincoln leads to the attempted secession of several slave-holding states, and the American Civil War begins. In 1862, Nathaniel Gordon becomes the only person hanged in U.S. history for being engaged in the slave trade. 1863, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in Confederate-controlled states. Most slaves in border states are freed by state action, and a separate law frees the slaves in Washington, D.C. In 1865, the Civil War is over and slavery abolished, except as punishment for crimes by the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. It frees 40,000 remaining slaves in border states. 30 out of 36 states vote to ratify it. New Jersey, Delaware, Kentucky, and Mississippi vote against it. Okay, so first thing with this last part, it abolished slavery except as a punishment for crimes. And really all that means is that the forefathers recognized that being in prison was slavery. So that's the only time that legal in the States. There you have it. That's slavery from 1800 to 1865. So from the very beginning, it really looks like there was a lot of people out there, especially the North, that were anti-slavery, and they did what they could to get rid of it. But in some cases, there's step backs, like the Dred Scott and the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing at that time the Congress was heavily Southern. Still not an excuse, but good men and women have fought against it from the beginning. The privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Here with the adapting of the writ of habeas corpus into the Constitution, you can see one of the chief complaints to freedom that the forefathers had with England and it being abolished in the states. Writ of habeas corpus states that a person has the right, after they are arrested, to be brought before a judge in a timely manner as to either ensure his release or to keep him imprisoned under lawful grounds. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. This basically means you can't find a person or persons guilty of a crime without proper court proceedings first. And if you're old enough to remember when the Patriot Act was passed, this pretty much made this null and void if the government thought a person was a threat to the country, which is now why people sit in Gitmo without ever being in courtroom. Also, the no ex facto makes it that the law cannot be made after the fact. So if you do something and then they can't, after the fact, make it a law and then arrest you for what you did before the law was enacted. You have a right to know what the laws are before you do this. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. So as a note, this was changed in the 16th Amendment, which we talked about yesterday a little bit, that allowed for federal taxes. What's interesting to me about the 16th Amendment, it was added 26 years after the Constitution was written. So what I gather from that is no matter how fair our forefathers tried to make this new country, it could not be done without federal taxes and taxes in general. or at least they did not see a way to do it. I believe it was Reagan who cut taxes to the people, which gave the people more money, which in turn they spent buying products, which in effect made more sales tax, which is a win all around. Consumers were able to buy more, companies had greater revenue, and the government still got paid. Trump also started along this path, but the pandemic messed up a lot of what he was trying to do for our country. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. This just basically states that you can't put tariffs on goods from state to state. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall vessels bound to or from one state be obligated to enter, clear, or pay duties in another. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. The government has to prove where their money is being spent, and that the money can't be spent on anything other than where the law allows you to spend money. So no stealing money, no giving it to special interest group, things like that. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, except of any present annulment, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. This part is really important because it's a direct break from all previous governments that existed, and that no gifts shall be accepted while holding an office from any foreign states. So you can't be bribed, is what it's saying. There'll be no nobility, and you can't be bribed without Congress. Well, you can't be bribed, but you can't accept anything without Congress allowing you to. That concludes the Constitution for today. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to leave a like, comment, and share the podcast. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.